Hi, my name is Rosemary Jackson. I'm in SPCE 683-813, and I will be doing my safmeds final checkpoint 4. Get these shuffled up. I have some not in the right direction, so that's great. Okay, I'm gonna start at 1 minute. So I got 30 seconds until then. Professional certification, voluntary credential issued by a private organization that is authorized by members of the profession, not the government. Professional certification. Brief descriptions of the dimension represented by and scaled along each axis. Axis labels. Vertical lines are drawn upward from the horizontal axis to show condition change line. The difference between the cost of a treatment or a cost-benefit ratio. A straight horizontal line that represents time, x-axis. Pass. Written guidelines that provide direction for conducting the practice. Professional standards. Okay, that was the 1 minute. Now I'll just be reading them, and my cards are literally every direction. An emotional reaction of anger or frustration, including operant behavior, which injuries or is otherwise aversive to the controller. Counter control. Provide clear guidelines for their members to follow when deciding a course of proper action in conducting their professional duties. Ethical codes of behavior. Vertical line drawn upward from the left-hand end of the horizontal axis. Vertical axis. Statements describing corrective, disciplinary, and revocation actions depending on the circumstances for violations of professional disciplinary standards. Behavioral effect associated with abrupt increases in ratio requirements when moving from denser to thinner reinforcement schedules. Ratio strain. Reinforcement that requires the movement of others. Socially mediated reinforcement. Provides physical assistance as needed by having instructor remain close to the learner and provide more restrictive prompting only when the learner is not responding correctly. Graduated guidance. A stimulus change that functions as a punisher and decreases the frequency of behavior that it precedes as a result of evolutionary development. It does not rely on previous learning history. Primary unconditioned punishers. An assessment method that includes gathering information from familiar parties through surveys or interviews to determine what an individual might like. Indirect preference assessments. Schedule of reinforcement in which reinforcement is contingent on a response being different in same specified way from previous response or specified number of responses. Lag reinforcement. Designed to evoke a specific imitative response and may include teaching a child to say a word, to brush his teeth, or paint a picture. Planned models might include a child learning curse words from peers or how to sing a song on the radio. Unplanned models, An assessment method that includes gathering information from familiar parties through surveys, direct preference assessment. Reinforcer generalization when it happens, train to generalize. A 2D graph with a logarithmic scaled y-axis so that equal distances on the vertical axis represent changes in behavior that are of equal proportions. Semi-logarithmic charts. Allows the client to access the reinforcers that have previously maintained the problem behavior, alternative behaviors. Adhere to documentation expectations. Participate in observations or rehearsals. Respond professionally to feedback. Meet performance expectations. Seek clarification. Provide supervisor with performance feedback. Supervisee expectations. Allocation of responses to choices available on concurrent schedules of reinforcement. Rates of responding across choices are distributed in proportions that match the rates of reinforcement received for each choice alternative. Matching law. Skills are identified in sequence. Definition where these skills should be developed and mastery criteria on identified. Supervisee goal setting. A schedule of reinforcement in which the response requirements of 2 or more basic schedules must be met in a specific sequence before reinforcement is delivered. Stimulus is correlated with each component of the schedule. Chain schedule. A stimulus change that functions as a reinforcer and increases the frequency of behavior that it precedes as a result of evolutionary development. It does not rely on previous learning history. Primary unconditioned reinforcers. When skills trained through behavioral skills training are tested in the natural environment to allow learners to contact contingencies described in training. INSIT assessment. A variety of techniques for gradually transferring stimulus control with a minimum of errors. Errorless learning. Prior to preference assessment, potential tangibles that could act to increase future occurrences of behavior. Potential reinforcers. Develop, improve, and maintain the behavior. Analytic and ethical repertoires. Positive outcomes associated with evidence based on supervision. Embrace the participants' values, expectations, traditions, and ideas. Cultural match. An observer who is unaware of the study's purpose and or experimental conditions. In effect, naive observer. 2D graph that shows relative distribution of individual scatter plots. Covert events typically accessible only to the person experiencing them. Private events. Punishment that requires the involvement of others. Socially mediated punishment. Stimulus change that follows a behavior of interest. Consequence. Experimental design in which participants are presented with a 2T response option. Each option is associated with distractive stimulus and leads to a different set of treatment procedures. Concurrent chain design. Inadequate professional repertoire, difficulty problem solving and database decision making. Inadequate supervisory repertoire, unethical behavior, negative outcomes associated with failure to provide evidence-based supervision. A schedule of reinforcement in which the response requirements of 2 or more basic schedules must be met in a specific sequence before reinforcement is delivered. Stimulus is correlated with each component of the schedule. Chain schedule. Describes communication through speech, vocal, verbal. Antecedent intervention that provides non-contingent access to preferred sources of reinforcement. Environmental enrichment. Behavior analysts are required to respect intellectual property laws by obtaining permission to use copyrighted or trademarked materials and providing proper citations, attributions or symbols, and refrain from unlawfully obtaining or disclosing proprietary information. Use of intellectual property. Describes the behavior of making noises or sounds without social mediation. Vocal nonverbal. The environment in which something occurs. Setting. Teach behaviors to occur with consequences which are likely to happen in the natural environment. Introduce natural maintaining contingency. Use self-instruction, self-recording, set of cues, mediate, generalize. Teach behavior across multiple stimulus conditions. Train sufficient exemplars. Teach behavior to occur in all settings. Sequential modification. Multiple component treatment package for reducing unwanted habits. Treatment typically includes self-awareness, training involving response detection and procedures for identifying events that precede and trigger the response. Habit reversal. An assessment method that includes gathering information via direct observation and manipulation of stimuli. Direct preference assessment. Terminal goals should reflect the reinforcement that matches the natural environment. Maximize contingencies within the natural environment as well as making consequences indiscriminable. Then reinforcement. Performance feedback to supervisors by their supervisees related to supervision procedures. Upward evaluations. Consolidates, updates, and replaces the former BACB's professional, disciplinary, and ethical standards and guidelines for responsible conduct for behavior analysis. Compliance goal occurs when the most salient component of a compound stimulus arrangement controls responding and interferes with the acquisition of stimulus control by the more relevant stimulus. Overshadowing. Changing a contingency of reinforcement by gradually increase the response ratio or the extent of the time interval. Schedule thinning. A procedure in which a person compares her performance of a target behavior with a predetermined goal or standard, often a component of self-management. Self-evaluation. Initial assessment of supervisee skills is critical for establishing clear goals for supervision. Interview and direct observation such as options for this initial assessment. These methods allow for an assessment of the supervisee's knowledge and ability to perform the procedures he or she will be responsible for in his or her job role. Supervisee initial assessment. Single words or brief descriptive phrases printed along the top of the graph and parallel to the horizontal axis. Condition labels. A schedule of reinforcement in which two or more contingents of reinforcement operate independently and simultaneously for two or more behaviors. Concurrent schedule. And the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. Empathy. Thank you.